Hey guys, tonight we take a slow float up into the soft blue folds of ancient mythology, where Olympus isn't a stormy battlefield of thunderbolts and betrayal, but more like a spa day in the clouds. You drift past marble pillars that seem to breathe, past temples where even the statues look half-dash asleep, and find yourself tiptoeing through thick air toward one of the most unexpected truths the myths forgot to mention: Zeus. That Zeus turns into a swan on weekends. Not metaphorically, literally. Wings, feathers, honks, the works. You're not hallucinating from too much warm milk. This is just another weird chapter the old storytellers left out. But you, lucky listener, are about to find out what the ancient scrolls really whispered. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is as you sink into this myth with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the last cloud step of Mount Olympus, yawning so hard your eyelids tremble. The air smells like old parchment and lavender soap. You expect to find thunder and booming gods. But instead you walk into silence. And right there, in the middle of a glimmering lake that definitely shouldn't exist, on top of a mountain floats a very majestic looking swan. A very smug looking swan, if we're being honest. That swan, it's Zeus. He sees you. He nods gracefully, as if this entire scenario makes perfect sense. You look around, waiting for an oracle or, at the very least, a toga-wearing intern to explain, but there's only the sound of gentle water lapping at the cloud-dashed shore. And maybe the faintest snore from a nearby tree. Zeus glides closer. It's the weekend, he says, thunderous and bird-like. I swan. You blink slowly. You swan. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or just Zeus being bored. He adds, fluffing his wings. Here's the thing. The old myths won't tell you. Being the king of gods is exhausting. Lightning bolts don't hurl themselves. Zeus still perfectly swan glides into a soft landing at the lake's edge, fluffing his feathers. The clouds under your feet puff upward like flour as you follow him, toward a curious shape in the distance. At first it looks like just another Olympic monument, but it becomes unmistakable. A throne of shimmering dense clouds. You've arrived at the cloud fluff throne room. Nestled beneath the north ridge of Olympus, hidden behind columns that hum lullabies, this is Zeus's lounge. No lightning bolts here, just throw pillows, lazy scrolls, and an enchanted footspar with dream rainwater. The seat shifts constantly. Right now, it cradles Zeus like the world's most luxurious beanbag chair. As he settles in, the throne poofs, releasing a whiff of eucalyptus and ambrosia vanilla. Historians argue whether the throne symbolized divine detachment or celestial laziness. Zeus mutters. He plucks a feather from his wing. It dissolves mid-air into glowing Z's. Classic god move. You sit beside the throne on a puffball marked intern. A harp plays itself in the corner. A scroll of bedtime myths unspools mid-air. A fresco shows Zeus napping across centuries. Ancient Greeks imagined gods not only powerful but relatable. Zeus, the napper, the sandal complainer. One epic, the Snooziad, chronicled a divine rest cycle, where Olympus ran on Hermes' caffeine. This throne, the epicenter of lazy mythic weekends. The room contradicts itself: majesty and coziness. Stars above, swan blanket below. Wanna try the foot spa? Zeus offered. You dip your toes. It's warm, effervescent, scented with fig leaves and lullabies. Zeus sighs. I don't get to enjoy this often, he says. Weekdays are war councils, thunder management, angry mortals shouting during dice games. You nod. Not literally there, but emotionally adjacent. Early temples didn't include chairs, Zeus says. Can you imagine? Hours on end, no seat. Archaeology confirms early altars were standing. Thrones came later. This throne, a monument to comfort. Olympus may have been designed for optimal napping. Every haw, breeze-tuned. Every cushion, lavender-soaked. No productivity pressure. Zeus is now half asleep, one wing drooping. A nymph tiptoes in places are meant for post-nap breath. She whispers, Even gods want fresh breath. The scene is absurdly cozy. On the wall, a tapestry reads, "Nap hard, rule harder." Maybe Zeus's fluffy throne isn't comic relief. Maybe it's mythic self-care. People think all-powerful means never tired, Zeus murmurs. But worship quotas, lightning metrics, exhausting. You nod again. Not knowing what a worship quota is, but feeling it deeply. A breeze carries musical lullaby hymn blend. Somewhere, a divine nap choir probably exists. Zeus stirs. Remind me to cancel Monday meetings. Consider it done, you whisper. This isn't just the calm before the mythic storm, it's the myth that never needed a storm. As the misty light dims, just slightly Olympus's version of evening mode, you hear a ruckus approaching. Not thunder, not chariots, but something more awkward, slappy. You turn to see a trident bobbing up and down behind a row of mist pines, accompanied by what can only be described as sarcastic humming. Poseidon, emerging with soggy swagger, the god of the sea is wearing kelp like a feather boa. And sunglasses clearly stolen from Apollo's lyre case. His sandals squelch dramatically. Nice feathers, Big Z, he quips, waving his trident lazily towards Zeus's lounging swan form. What's the plan next weekend? Flamingo. Maybe a pelican if you're feeling edgy. Zeus doesn't move. He emits a slow, melodic honk. You can't help it, you snort. Poseidon walks right up to the cloud throne and pokes it with the tip of his trident, which gives off a disappointed poof. Then he flops onto a cloud poof of his own, which immediately gets damp. The throne inches away slightly, perhaps by divine instinct. You know, Poseidon says, looking directly at you as if you're his backup audience. Double quotes. When I want to unwind, I become a sea otter. Float on my back. Crack some mollusks. It's dignified. You try not to picture it, but the bickering has begun. Zeus honks again. This one longer. Lazier. Possibly mocking. You're just jealous, he murmurs, stretching his wings. Jealous of molting. Please, you shed more feathers than Hera sheds passive aggression. Poseidon snorts. You inch toward the harp in the corner, hoping it will break the tension with a dramatic chord. It does. Sort of. It plays what sounds like the first two notes of a soap opera theme, and then gives up. Historians still argue whether these sibling spats were exaggerated. You mumble into your notepad. But fringe texts describe these interactions with vivid detail. One papyrus scroll questionably translated by a bored monk claims, Poseidon once dyed Zeus's swan feathers blue. Zeus retaliated by replacing Poseidon's trident with a giant sea cucumber for an entire afternoon. You've seen that kelp boa. You're starting to believe the tales. The fight isn't really a fight, though. More like a sleepy roast battle. Even divine rivalry runs at half speed on the weekend. Why not a dolphin? Anyway, Poseidon asks. They're sleek, intelligent, aquatic. You'd have coastal cults in no time. Zeus peeks open one eye. Too bouncy, I need to glide. More like water, Poseidon says with a grin. He summons a mock swan of sea mist, dancing exaggeratedly. Zeus conjures a mirror and preens a feather. You wonder what it's like to be both ancient and petty for eternity. Even at the top of Olympus, brothers are still brothers. Suddenly, Hermes zips in like a caffeine-fueled blur. Winged sandals, skimming cloud, scrolls flying. Flight permit, he shouts. Both gods groan. Again? Again, Zeus mutters. Hermes shows his badge. Celestial Park Ranger. You raise an eyebrow. Don't ask, he says. After the Pegasus incident, all flying creatures must file forms. He hands Zeus a quill. Zeus signs with his beak. The scroll rolls itself up and disappears with a pop. Poseidon chuckles. Told you, ocean's free range, yet full of jellyfish. Zeus replies, hard pass. Pass. A soft breeze lifts your notepad. This is surreal. Not explosive myth, but slice of life Olympus. Downtime. A divine sitcom. Casual teasing. Flight permits. Hermes offers a swan-shaped cookie. It tastes like clouds. Don't get too comfortable. He grins. Ares will ruin it soon. Poseidon flicks ocean spray. Try not to startle the nymphs, he says. He vanishes into a puddle of sea foam. You've just witnessed divine banter, red tape, and swan slouching. Zeus didn't lift a talon. He doesn't have to. It's Saturday. Zeus stretches one wing luxuriously, the tip grazing a tuft of cloud that promptly squeaks and drifts away like an offended marshmallow. You'd think lounging in swan form would be restful enough. But apparently, even when you re a feathery god reclining on a throne made of dreams, the weekend still comes with paperwork. A scroll is one rimmed in gold and sealed with a wax imprint of a wing flutters down and bonks you gently on the head. You unroll it. The script glows faintly, animated with little yawning stars and blinking constellations. By decree of the Celestial Traffic Authority, it begins. Any airborne entity larger than a napping raven must acquire a classy flight permit for Olympus airspace between sunset Friday and sunrise Monday. Zeus honks once in protest. You hold up the scroll. Regulations, you say gently, already feeling like his divine intern. He sighs deep and theatrical. When did the sky become so regulated? You squint at the fine print. Apparently, after that Pegasus congestion incident over Mount Parnassus, something about a mid-air a cappella collision. Hermes appears again, holding what looks like an Olympian clipboard. He jots a note, muttering, mid-air duet pile-ups, never again. Here's the thing about Olympus bureaucracy. It's weirdly efficient. The gods may be eternal, but when it comes to airborne management, there's no room for chaos. Every cloud formation above a certain altitude has a lane designation. Every god in animal form must declare their route. Even Apollo, when riding his sun chariot, has to file his sunrise arcs by Thursday afternoon. Historians still argue whether these heavenly regulations were allegorical representations of divine order or just evidence that even immortals need office hours. You jot into your scroll. But there's a more delicious theory. One whispered among the parchment hoarders of fringe libraries that a secret society of nymphs created Olympus's celestial bureaucracy in response to the gods' increasingly chaotic shape-shifting weekends. A swan here, a boar there, a giant animated crab crashing into a star orchard. Something had to be done. Still better than Tartarus customs, Hermes says, as he hands Zeus a swan-stamped license. It glows for a second, then tucks itself behind one of Zeus's downy feathers like a backstage pass. Let me guess, Zeus mutters. Mandatory orientation, too, Hermes grins. We had a whole swan safety seminar last week, sponsored by Artemis, included a power scroll. Don't remind me, Zeus sighs. She made us watch that cautionary tale about Icarus, reimagined with geese. You chuckle softly. In this version, apparently, the wax didn't melt, he just got pooped on mid-flight and spiraled down out of sheer embarrassment. Your little cloud seat starts to vibrate faintly. An intercom sound, no doubt magical booms, across Olympus. All flight-enabled entities, please report planned destinations for celestial mapping. Do not honk in unauthorized zones. Zeus grumbles, I used to own the sky. Now I need clearance to glide over a cumulonimbus. Hermes shrugs, blame the modern myths. Ever since kids started picturing gods as superheroes, Olympus had to tighten up the rules. Can't have swan Zeus photobombing weather patterns. It's not all bad, though. You follow Zeus as he flaps toward a docking station, a glowing perch, shaped like a question mark, floating just above a sleepy ridge. It's known as Gate 9 3/4. Yes, that's Hermes insists. It was numbered before someone else trademarked the idea. The perch scans Zeus's license and emits a satisfied ding. You are cleared for route Delta Twilight to the Western Temple Lake, a disembodied voice. Drones estimate a glide time, 14 minutes. Feather turbulence, minimum. This is where the experience veers from mythology and slips fully into absurd relaxation. Zeus steps up, spreads his wings, and lifts off slowly, like someone easing into a hot bath. The air ripples, not from power, but comfort. You follow in a gondola-shaped cloud driven by a sleepy Pegasus named Craig. He chews air lazily as you drift behind Zeus, who glides like a goose in first class. Beneath you, you spot designated no-fly zones. One shaped like a harp, off-limits due to ongoing nymph karaoke. Another labeled Hara-snapping sector silence. Strictly enforced. At one point, a flock of minor deities in the form of sparrows zip past Zeus, all chirping. They screech to a halt, mid-air and salute. King of birds, one chirps, overly enthusiastic. Zeus bows his neck. Carry on. They dart off giggling. and nearly cause a celestial fender bender with an errant rainbow. You glance down and see a cloud checkpoint, shaped like a sleepy owl. There's an entire team of cherubs waving tiny batons, guiding traffic. One of them spins in place and drifts into a nap mid-rotation. Even Olympus' traffic control is sleepy. According to some ancient Babylonian interpretations, you whisper into your notebook. The sky was once thought to be a scroll itself written, erased, and rewritten nightly by celestial scribes. You watch Zeus leave behind a feathery trail, like cursive on twilight. The lake appears ahead, ringed by cloud lilies and stardust cattails. It's the official swan landing pad, glowing softly, perfectly still. Zeus descends gently, his landing barely disturbing the surface. He honks once, not in triumph, just acknowledgement. You arrive moments later, stepping off the gondola onto a dock carved from moonlight. I still say dolphin would have been better. You hear Poseidon's voice echo faintly from somewhere. Zeus ignores it. He is already drifting again, wings trailing ripples. The bureaucracy behind him for now. You watch the water for a while. Nothing happens, which is everything. The lake is quiet now, serene, in a way that makes even your thoughts slow down and recline. Zeus, still swan-shaped, floats in lazy circles as stars begin blinking overhead like someone slowly turning on night lights across the cosmos. You think the scene is complete until you hear giggling. Very soft, very well-mannered, suspiciously synchronized. You turn to find a pavilion tucked under a curve of cloud, shielded from view by a willow made of braided moonlight. Inside sit 4 figures, sipping tea from teacups shaped like polished acorns. One of them waves. "Come in," she says. "We're just getting started on the egg problem." You step closer. The figures are unmistakable mortal myths. Women once woven into tales, and, by weekend decree, granted a corner of Olympus to themselves. And right in the center, calm as an oracle, sits Leda. Yes, that Leda. She's older than the myths, say wiser, maybe, and a lot less interested in talking about what you think she'll talk about, which is refreshing. Honestly, this isn't that kind of meeting, Leda says kindly as you take a seat. We don't discuss that part. We do crossword puzzles and compare tea blends. You nod, relieved, as a cup is passed to you. It smells like thyme, fig, and something sleepier, maybe nostalgia. "We call ourselves the LFC," says one woman. You prompt. Leader's fan club. Another whispers with a grin, though sometimes it's literary fiction circle. Depending on who's asking. They all chuckle. The lake shimmers nearby, and you glance toward Zeus, now honking softly into a flower. He seems harmless, peaceful, even a floating metaphor in desperate need of a therapist. Or a nap, probably both. Historians still argue whether the tale of Zeus and Leda was a love story, a political metaphor, or just a myth gone weirdly off script. One club member says, folding a napkin with origami precision. Or whether it happened at all, Leda adds, sipping her tea. But we're not here to relitigate bedtime myths. We're here for the good stuff. She waves a scroll in the air. Tonight's reading, Ode to a Swan Who Forgot He Was Divine. It's technically satire, but quite moving in the right lighting. You sit back. The willow tree glows overhead. Crickets chirp from a nearby cloud hedge, possibly enchanted. Maybe they're just gods moonlighting as bugs. Hard to tell. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some obscure cults in ancient Thessaly actually believed Leda was the goddess, not Zeus. They said the swan was a disguise meant to test her divinity, not the other way around. This reverse swan theory gained popularity for a few decades, before being quietly retired mostly because it involved far too many bird costumes during rituals. Tonight though, it's just women sharing words. No feathers, no drama, no mythological eggs. Thank the stars. Leda unrolls the scroll and begins to read, her voice smooth as olive oil poured over marble. He paddled toward her like fog with wings, forgetful of storms, of kings, of things. And though he wore a crown of moonlit air, she saw only a bird who wanted care. The words drip slowly, like honey from a cracked jar. The other women sigh in quiet unison. You jot it down. Not the poem, just a moment, because this, right here, is the kind of myth you don't get in textbooks. The gentle ones. The weekends. The tea circles. "Do you still see him?" one woman asks Leda, with a sidelong glance. She shrugs. "Only on weekends. He shows up, paddles about, honks at lilies. It's more peaceful now. Fewer declarations. More drifting, sip in silence." The myth of Leda is often reduced to drama and shock value. But sitting here, you see it from a different angle. Maybe she wasn't trapped in the story. Maybe she outgrew it. Or maybe the gods were the ones confused, fluttering around in swan suits, trying to figure out what it meant to feel small, weightless, mortal. A soft chime sounds. The scroll has finished reading itself. Leda stands and smooths her robes. "That's enough for tonight." The other women begin to tidy the spacey cups, vanishing with faint poofs, rugs folding themselves, a little footstool hopping away like a cloud crab. You stand too, unsure whether to bow, or salute, or just smile. Leda gives you a wink. "Remember, every god's weekend is someone else's legend. We just prefer ours quieter." As you step back into the night, the cloud willow folds behind you. The moon reflects gently off the lake, where Zeus is now gliding in figurets. He looks content, and you're starting to feel like you might understand Olympus after all. Not as a kingdom of storms and punishment, but a sleepy hill, where gods wear feathers and mortals gather for tea. The lake is now glassy, lit by moonshine and feather shimmers, as Zeus is still in full swan form glides to a curved inlet marked by seashells and glowing mushrooms. You trail behind. Cloud sandals, barely whispering against the mist ground. The air smells like cinnamon, and whatever dreams taste like when you're too tired to finish them. You've arrived at what the gods call the Samni Feast Pavilion, but the local dryads, cupids, half-retired satyrs, refer to it more fondly as the Snoosatorium. Zeus steps ashore, flaps once with unnecessary flair, and waddles straight toward a domed tent of gauze and ivy, where low harp chords play on a loop. Inside, there are no roaring banquets, no overflowing wine fountains, just loungers, cloud couches, and star fuzz bean bags spaced around a glowing table topped with the laziest, dreamiest food you've ever seen. Coconut, milk, ambrosia, served in little bowls shaped like yawns. A sleepy nymph hands you a spoon carved from moon bark and says, "Go slow. This blend was designed by Morpheus himself. It'll make your soul feel like it's been hugged by a ghost." You take a bite. Instantly, your shoulders are not, your thoughts slow. You're not even sure you remember your own birthday, but you remember how it felt to nap during thunderstorms as a kid. Same thing. Zeus slides into a crescent-shaped lounge beside a dish of plump dreamberries, honks approvingly, and immediately begins softly snoring. Asaita strolls by with a cheese tray and nods to you. "Welcome to the chillest table in all Olympus. No speeches, no rituals, no timeline stress, just snacks and sleep." You smile, melting a little into your seat. This is your kind of myth, and historically, feasts were indeed a huge part of divine life. But you rarely hear about the quiet ones, the sleepy gatherings, the midnight luncheons where gods murmured about dreams, not war. Historians still argue whether these gentler scenes were edited out for drama. You murmur into your notepad, or if scrolls just couldn't capture how soothing soft cheese really is. You glance across the table. Aphrodite, wearing fuzzy socks and sipping tea with a wedge of fig tart, lifts her cup in your direction. Ares tries to enter. He's wearing a battle toga and smelling faintly of victory and goat. The entire tent groans in unison. "Bro, it's nap hour," mutters Dionysus, who's dozing off mid-greg. Ares grunts. "But I brought dip." He holds up a bowl of something that's probably spicy enough to punch a hole in reality. Zeus cracks one eye open. "Is it sleep safe?" Ares hesitates. The tent gives him a look. "Fine," he mutters, placing it on the snack bar and stomping off, muttering about how swan feathers are a sign of weakness. Quirky tidbit: there's a minor god named Hypnoclex forgotten by most who was worshipped only during these feasts. His domain, the divine pause between chewing and sleep. Statues of him depict a man mid-bite, eyes fluttering closed, mouth open in perfect, dreamy stillness. A tiny shrine to Hypnoclex glows in one corner of the pavilion. You bow respectfully. The room dims slightly as a cloud lantern floats past. It smells like warm bread and lullabies. Zeus sighs with satisfaction. Why isn't this the part people worship? He mumbles, I should be remembered as the god of naps. You nod. Honestly, you're making a strong case. Another nymph appears with a plate of muffled Honeycrisp apples. Fruit that crunches so quietly it registers only in your memory. Across from you, Hermes tries to tell a story, but forgets the ending halfway through and falls asleep mid-sentence. Scroll still in hand. Someone tucks him in with a quilt depicting famous divine snoozes. Achilles under a fig tree. Athena, napping with one eye open. Cerberus curled into a sleepy little wheel of doom. The table hums with low contentment. Outside the tent, a breeze flutters through an enchanted mobile made of tiny, enchanted sandals. Each one chimes softly in its own Kian. Olympic lullaby orchestra. You take a deep breath, and for a moment, everything ancient feels new. The myths aren't roaring, they're whispering. Lounging, nibbling soft cheese, while dreaming of moonbeams and foot massages. Mainstream myth often skips over these parts, favoring thunderbolts and ego wars. But here, Zeus is not a god in disguise. He's just relaxing, recharging, not chasing women or battling titans, just grazing on coconut milk, ambrosia, and murmuring about whether clouds should be more almond-shaped. Somewhere in the background, a minor muse drops her lyre and immediately apologizes. Too sharp, she says, it might disturb the sleep vibes. Zeus waves a wing. You're good, just think fluffier thoughts. And, honestly, you do. As dessert winds down, which in this case is just round 2 of nap-inducing stew, you jot one more note. Sleep is the most sacred ritual no temple ever formalized. You stretch, full and fluttery. Zeus honks in agreement. Nobody claps. That would be too loud. Instead, everyone sighs in perfect harmony, like a choir of pillows exhaling. You think, if you had to stay in Olympus forever, it wouldn't be the drama that kept you here, it would be this. The moment is perfect until it isn't. The faint scent of olive oil and armpit arrives first, sneaking under the gauzy curtain like an unwanted breeze. Then come the footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, clanking. Somewhere, a harp twangs out of tune and abruptly stops. A nap nymph knocks over a tray of sleep mango bites in a panic. Ares has returned. This time, he's not just carrying dip, he's brought pillows. You hear him before you see him. If Zeus gets weekends off to play swan, I get to unleash the nap warrior. The curtain bursts open. Ares stands in full bronze armor, except his chestplate is replaced by a knitted vest that says nap hard, in embroidered lightning thread. In each hand, a weaponized pillow stuffed with what can only be celestial goose down and lightly cursed with insomnia banishment spells. Not again, someone mutters from a beanbag. Historians still argue whether this infamous incident known in whispered scrolls as the was an actual conflict or an elaborate divine sleepover gone rogue. You whisper into your scroll, heart thudding quietly. Zeus lifts his head from his soft dish of dreamberries. Ares, what are you doing? Ares grins like a 12-year-old with way too much sugar and nowhere to put it. I challenge you, he says, to a duel of the doozy, a pillow war for Olympus. You try not to laugh. You fail. Zeus blinks slowly. I am a swan. Exactly, says Ares. Flight advantage. Hermes, still wrapped in a throw blanket shaped like a scroll, peeks over. Should we activate the do not disturb wards? No, Zeus says. Rising, graceful, plump, glowing. Let him have this. The room shifts. Pillows float from invisible shelves. Nap canons, made of cloudstone, emerge from the floor. Two satyrs hastily build a referee stand from cheese trays. The harp begins playing something that sounds suspiciously like dramatic battle music from a kid's cartoon. Fringe scrolls say this event nearly derailed 3 major prophecies and at least 1 mortal wedding. Hermes says, you get a clipboard. Why? You don't know. Someone hands it to you. You are now the official naptime battle scribe. Ares charges first, a full, thunderous leap into the air, swinging his pillow of doom over his head. It whiffs past Zeus, who flaps sideways and honks in reply. The pillow explodes into a puff of lavender glitter, coating several startled nymphs. Zeus retaliates. With a serene glide and a flick of his wing, he launches his own pillow, carried aloft by divine breeze. It arcs, spirals, and lands directly on Ares' helmet, knocking it sideways. Point to Swan Zeus, calls Hermes, who's now in a judge's wig made of clouds. Ares growls. You dare. He charges again, this time leaping into the air, flipping off a snooze cushion, and executing a dramatic triple twirl before unleashing a volley of travel-sized pillows from a bandolier. They hit everyone. Dionysus, to Muses, a confused owl but miss Zeus entirely. You scribble furiously. War god suffers from accuracy issues. May need eye exam. Then something incredible. Zeus, still mid-glide, begins executing a series of swan maneuvers that have clearly been honed over centuries of aquatic relaxation. A wing dip, a spin, a honk that echoes with ancient dignity. He hurls a single down pillow, blessed by Hera herself, because it leaves a trail of embroidery that reads, "I told you so," and it lands squarely on Ares' face. Poof! Ares drops, not in defeat. In sleep, the god of war curls up right there on the battlefield, hugging the pillow like a defeated toddler in a thunderstorm. The harp shifts to lullaby mode. A tiny satyr tiptoes out and tucks a fleece over Ares' legs. Everyone applauds, but softly, like a breeze through leaves. Zeus lands with swanly elegance, honks once, and settles back into his beanbag. And that, he murmurs, is why I swung. A nymph brings you a cup of something called vitri cocoa, which tastes like childhood naps and whispered fairy tales. You take another note. Crises averted by nap. Most successful war in Olympus history. Ares begins snoring. In the background, you hear Hermes whisper to a muse. We're still recovering from the great blanket siege of 223 BCE. The muse nods. My lyre still smells like chamomile. You lean back, amazed. This wasn't just a silly interlude. This was Olympus working exactly as it should. Chaos, comedy, and then cuddles. You can almost see the divine lesson. Even war gods need rest. Even thunderous rivals need naps. Even drama can be soft, feathered, and resolve with a 30-minute snooze timer. You glance at Zeus. His eyes are closed. His wing is a blanket now. The swan is settling. You write one final line for the section. War and peace are sometimes only one pillow apart. You would think that, after a divine pillow war, Olympus would need a break. But apparently, the exact opposite happens. The moment Ares starts snoring curled up like a battle-weary hedgehog, the tent stirs with a different kind of energy. Softer, but somehow more chaotic. It's matchmaking hour. You hear the whispers before you see the participants. A giggle from a lounging nymph. A poorly concealed harp flourish. A wingtip brushing another in slow motion. Zeus, nestled once again in his cloud poof, has one eye open now and is clearly paying attention. Oh no, mutters Hermes, still sipping cocoa from a mug that says, I can't keep track of these mortals. Is this what I think it is? You whisper. Zeus honks gently. Saturday evening is divine flirting hour. Swan form optional. Of course, it is. You're barely able to record that before you notice 3 gods, not 1. 3 strutting past the pavilion's edge in partial animal forms. One has the legs of a horse, another a flamingo neck, and the third, you're not even sure. It's like if a hedgehog met a fog machine and made it fashion. Why? Animals, you ask, sipping your second dreamberry tea. Zeus prints its tradition. Shape-shifting shows effort, charm, boldness. Hermes leans in. It's also completely chaotic. Last weekend, Apollo tried seducing a mountain spirit as a hummingbird, got stuck mid-shift. Chirped in iambic pentameter for 2 hours. You can't decide whether to be horrified or impressed. This particular ritual, known unofficially as the Twilight Entanglements, isn't written in any major scroll, but fringe myth collectors have noted its patterns. Gods, demigods, and various mythical beings gather under enchanted moonlight to engage in courtship rituals that involve transformations, poetry, and of course spectacular. Historians still argue whether these events were metaphorical allegories about divine love, or just a very fancy excuse to gossip and flirt without consequences. Tonight, the swan plays host. Zeus flutters to the center of the glowing path leading to the Twilight Fountain, his weekend dating venue of choice, and performs a slow, graceful pirouette in the water. A nymph sighs dramatically from behind a cloud bush. Subtle as always, Hermes mutters. You watch as another figure approaches the fountain. a minor river goddess, dressed in fish-scale robes, eyes twinkling. She and Zeus exchange glances. Then honks. Well, Zeus honks, she hums a response, and you realize something unsettling. You're witnessing a mythic flirtation that could, depending on how this goes, generate entire future legends, eggs, hybrids, odes. You silently pray for restraint. But it's not just Zeus. To your left, a centaur is reciting couplets to a willow dryad, who appears to be pretending to be asleep. Behind you, Dionysus has turned into a particularly luxurious-looking leopard and is doing slow circles around a muse who keeps dropping her fan on purpose. There is even, no joke, a minor wind god trying to flirt by blowing scented breezes at a tree nymph. Zeus glides back toward you. Sometimes, he whispers, being a swan isn't about stealth or mischief. Sometimes, it's about ambience. You nod slowly, unsure how to record that without it sounding like a perfume ad. A sleepy oracle walks past holding a sign. One night only, Swan singles mixer with an asterisk that reads, form not guaranteed to stay constant. You jot that down. Here's a quirky tidbit. In certain Arcadian villages, there were seasonal festivals where the youth would dress as animals and perform courtship dances in homage to the gods. Scholars long debated whether this was symbolic or just awkward teenage theater, but now you're thinking it might have been divine cosplay. A nymph pulls out a lyre and begins playing something sultry. Three gods instantly try to turn into peacocks. Only one succeeds. The others look like very fashionable chickens. You hear a chuckle. It's Leda. She's returned to the fountain edge, arms folded, expression wry. It's always the same, she murmurs. Wings, honks, glances, awkward small talk. You'd think gods would evolve. Zeus approaches her less proud now. More swan-level socks. He honks gently. She raises an eyebrow. Flirting doesn't erase the egg situation, you know. Zeus honks again, a little sheepishly. There's a pause. Ah, quiet one. Then Leda sighs. Fine. One lap, but no poetry this time. They circle the fountain together, slow and sleepy. You can't help but smile. Hermes floats down beside you, notebook in hand. You writing all this? Trying. Goody, he says. The historians will need it. Or burn it. Hard to say. You scribble a final note. Even gods fall in love, like middle schoolers in disguise. And as the stars glitter like gossiping eyes overhead, you realize that Olympus on weekends is just one big, mythic meet-cute machine, full of feathers, failed seductions, and strangely sincere honks. After the last flirtation fizzles into a shared nap on a petal-shaped couch, and the lyre music winds down into single plinks of awkward silence, you slip away from the twilight fountain and wander toward the quieter edges of Olympus. The night air is thick with incense and the distant scent of roasted fig. You're looking for calm, but instead, you stumble into something weirder. A tent. Tattered. Unlabeled. It hums faintly, like it remembers being important. Once, you push aside the curtain and find yourself in what can only be described as a museum of forgotten myths. A dim room packed with scrolls that look like they were written by insomniac scribes hopped up on fermented grape juice. Each one bears some version of the Zeus swan stories, some almost recognizable, others wildly unhinged. A sleepy curator draped in a moth-bitten toga greets you with a whisper, "Welcome to the Bureau of Boring and Banned Myths. Please don't touch the scrolls. They may touch back." The curator waves a lantern. Shadows dance across a mural on the far wall. You? Bling. Is that Zeus in a tutu? Yes, the curator says before you can even ask. That scroll claims Zeus joined a traveling circus once a year as a ballerina swan. The troupe was called Feather Justice. You nearly choke on your own breath. This can't be real. Fringe myth, he says, shrugging. Some versions say it was a metaphor for balance and beauty. Others say it was just a bad translation. You drift past a display labeled Alternate Swan Theories. Theory 1. Zeus was cursed to become a swan every weekend by a disgruntled goose. Oracle, he stood up for brunch. Theory 2. The swan was never Zeus. It was Hera in disguise spying on him, and he never figured it out. Theory 3. The entire swan story was invented by a bard with a feather allergy. and a vendetta. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were rejected for being heretical, or simply too weird for temple use. The curator mumbles, adjusting a halo-shaped paperclip on one scroll. You ask if any of these myths were ever popular. Oh sure, he says. For a few weeks in 412 BCE, the Zeus as swan thespian version was all the rage in Boeotia. Then it fell out of favor when the lead actor got stage fright and flew into the audience. A display labeled Swan Propaganda catches your eye. Posters advertising ancient plays, comics etched in bronze, even what looks like a proto board game called Zeus a Goose or Loose. You roll a shell, choose your form, and try not to seduce the wrong mortal. The curator explains, great for ages 9 and up. You chuckle, overwhelmed. One scroll, yellowed and peeling, catches your eye. It's written in hurried script and annotated with doodles tiny swans doing yoga. You squint at the title. Weekend of Wings. A Swanifesto. Oh, that one's special, the curator says, taking it down gently. That scroll claims Zeus turned into a swan because he was trying to feel something. You bling like ... emotionally. Exactly. He said thunder didn't hit like it used to. Seduction was repetitive. The only time he felt free was when he could float. You read the opening lines. He traded his crown for a curve of neck, the sky's roar for the hush of a lake. Each feather, a memory lighter than guilt. Each glide, a reason not to strike. It's weirdly good, maybe even profound. Why was this banned? The curator shrugs. Too boring. Not dramatic enough. No lightning. No betrayal. Just feelings. You stare at the scroll a moment longer. There's something comforting about it. As if someone once understood that even gods burn out. Next to it is a small corner labeled Rejected Transformations. Scrolls that claim Zeus once tried turning into a puddle to sneak into a poetry contest, or that he briefly became a large, judgmental squirrel to monitor Athena's lecture. Attendance. One sketch shows a badly drawn platypus. This one never made it past peer review. The curator sighs. You write in your notebook, Olympus isn't made of truth, it's made of edits. As you prepare to leave, the curator calls out, take a mint. They help with memory wipes. Some of these myths are too sticky. You pocket one wrapped in parchment that says forget what you just saw and exit the tent. The stars outside seem quieter now. And maybe, just maybe, it's not the polished myths that matter most. It's the weird ones. The awkward drafts. The ones that say, even immortals have identity. Crisis. You glance back once at the tent, where a faint honk echoes from somewhere inside. You're not sure if it was a scroll or a memory. Either way, it feels true. After the last flirtation fizzles into a shared nap on a petal-shaped couch, and the lyre music winds down into single plinks of awkward silence, you slip away from the twilight fountain and wander toward the quieter edges of Olympus. The night air is thick with incense and the distant scent of roasted fig. You're looking for calm, but instead, you stumble into something weirder. A tent. Tattered. Unlabeled. It hums faintly, like it remembers being important once. You push aside the curtain and find yourself in what can only be described as a museum of forgotten myths. A dim room packed with scrolls that look like they were written by insomniac scribes, hopped up on fermented grape juice. Each one bears some version of the Zeus swan story, some almost recognizable, others wildly unhinged. A sleepy curator draped in a moth-bitten toga greets you with a whisper. Welcome to the Bureau of Boring and Banned Myths. Please don't touch the scrolls. They may touch back. The curator waves a lantern. Shadow stands across a mural on the far wall. You bling. Is that Zeus in a tutu? Yes, the curator says, before you can even ask. That scroll claims Zeus joined a traveling circus once a year as a ballerina swan. The troupe was called Feather Justice. You nearly choke on your own breath. This can't be real. Fringe myth, he says, shrugging. Some versions say it was a metaphor for balance and beauty. Others say it was just a bad translation. You drift past a display labeled Alternate Swan Theories. Theory 1. Zeus was cursed to become a swan every weekend by a disgruntled goose oracle. He stood up for brunch. Theory 2. The swan was never Zeus. It was Hera in disguise, spying on him, and he never figured it out. Theory 3. The entire swan story was invented by a bard with a feather allergy and a vendetta. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were rejected for being heretical or simply too weird for temple use. The curator mumbles, adjusting a halo-shaped paperclip. On one scroll, you ask if any of these myths were ever popular. "Oh, sure," he says. For a few weeks, in 412 BCE, the Zeus as swan thespian version was all the rage in Boeotia. Then it fell out of favor when the lead actor got stage fright and flew into the audience. A display labeled "Swan Propaganda" catches your eye. Posters advertising ancient plays, comics etched in bronze, even what looks like a proto-board game called Zeus, Goose, or Lose. You roll a shell, choose your form, and try not to seduce the wrong mortal, the curator explains. Great for ages 9 and up, you chuckle, overwhelmed. One scroll, yellowed and peeling, catches your eye. It's written in hurried script and annotated with doodles tiny swans doing yoga. You squint at the title. Weekend of Wings, a Swanifesto. "Oh, that one's special," the curator says, taking it down gently. That scroll claims Zeus turned into a swan because he was trying to feel something. You blink. Like? Emotionally. Exactly. He said thunder didn't hit like it used to. Seduction was repetitive. The only time he felt free was when he could float. You read the opening lines. He traded his crown for a curve of neck, the sky's roar, for the hush of a lake. Each feather, a memory lighter than guilt. Each glide, a reason not to strike. It's weirdly good, maybe even profound. Why was this banned? The curator shrugs. Too boring. Not dramatic enough. No lightning. No betrayal. Just feelings. You stare at the scroll a moment longer. There's something comforting about it. As if someone once understood that even gods burn out. Next to it is a small corner labeled Rejected Transformations. Scrolls that claim Zeus once tried turning into a puddle to sneak into a poetry contest, or that he briefly became a large, judgmental squirrel to monitor Athena's lecture attendance. One sketch shows a badly drawn platypus. This one never made it past peer review. The curator sighs. You write in your notebook, Olympus isn't made of truth, it's made of edits. As you prepare to leave, the curator calls out, take a mint. They help with memory wipes. Some of these myths are too sticky. You pocket one wrapped in parchment that says, forget what you just saw, and exit the tent. The stars outside seem quieter now. And maybe, just maybe, it's not the polished myths that matter most. It's the weird ones. The awkward drafts, the ones that say, even immortals have identity. Crises. You glance back once at the tent, where a faint honk echoes from somewhere. Inside, you're not sure if it was a scroll or a memory. Either way, it feels true. You walk for what feels like a long time, though time on Olympus tends to wobble like jelly left in the sun. The path forks gently and glows faintly under your feet, guiding you toward a stretch of meadow humming with distant bird call and something you could only describe as magical snoring. You've reached the hill of Hybrihabitsa place, where gods come not to rule, but to experiment. Not with mortals or morality, but with their weakened alter egos. Apparently, Zeus isn't the only one with a transformation kink. Chalkboard at the entrance reads, Animal Shift Schedule. Please no overlapping forms without notifying the Dryads. Below that, Artemis Flamingo Saturdays only Apollo, Sleepy Bear, on rotation. Athena Owl. Obviously, but only during debates. Dionysus, something called a wine acorn, which you decide not to question. You blink as Artemis swoops overhead in majestic pink feathers, does a lazy mid-air pirouette, and lands on one leg with the balance of a ballerina and the smugness of someone who knows their wingspan is gorgeous. Zeus told me about you, she says, fluffing. You're the intern. I suppose so. Good, she says, ruffling. We needed someone to file complaints. Apollo's bear form keeps rolling into my herb garden. As if summoned by shame, Apollo lumbers past. A large bear, golden fur, glinting like sunlight in late afternoon. He's wearing sunglasses and dragging a harp with one paw. You hear a groan. He tried to hibernate during rehearsal again. Artemis mutters, "You scribble notes." Here's a mainstream historical nugget. Many ancient myths linked gods to animals, symbolically. Athena's owl, Poseidon's horse head is his black ram, but there are of Canaan barely whispered myths suggesting that some gods took on these forms not just symbolically, but out of divine boredom. Some say it was escape. Some say it was cosmic therapy. Historians still argue whether these tales represent spiritual transcendence, satirical backlash, or sheer godly mischief. You write, a group of minor muses flutters by, mid-change half hummingbird, half unfinished cloud. One sneezes, sparkles. They all politely pretend not to notice. At the far edge of the hill, there's a gathering. The gods are lounging in their part-animal forms like a support group from a very bizarre children's book. One has antlers and a monocle. Another, a lion's tail sticking out from a toga with floral trim. They sip from mugs that say, "I am my own metaphor." Artemis leads you to a podium built from intertwined antlers and vines. Beside it, a chalkboard titled Weekend, Transformation Reflections. You are handed chalk. Would you like to share your form? Artemis asks. You freeze. I'm just a mortal. The gods pause. Several tilt their animal heads. I am, says a jackalope-shaped demigod. That's rare. Zeus, now in full swan regalia again, waddles forward and gestures you toward the board with his beak. You hesitate, then write. Form writer. Why? I needed to remember things no one else thought mattered. Silence. Then, surprisingly, nods. Dionysus raises his wine-acorn hoof in approval. Apollo, still a bear, claps slowly with one. Pour deep, he murmurs. You sit. Someone hands you a badge. Shifter in spirit. You learn the sacred rule of Olympus weekend forms. It's not about escape. It's about amplification. A bear isn't hiding from light, it's absorbing it. A flamingo isn't flaunting. She's rebalancing. A swan isn't pretending. He's pausing. Even Hera has one. Someone whispers. A lynx silent, sharp-eyed, only ever seen. When someone forgets to wash their robes, there's laughter now. Laughter in the forms. In the freedom, someone turns into a turtle and wins a race against a breezy satyr who forgets to finish. A Mogadis tunnels beneath the cheese spread. Someone turns into a sentient fern. They're applauded. Zeus honks gently and glides toward a podium. He raises a wing and all fall silent. His voice is softer than usual. Transformation is not deceived. He says, "It is rest." It is the divine saying, "Not today, thrones. I need feathers." You write that down without looking up. A centaur morphs into a very tired pigeon and coos in agreement. The meeting ends with a quiet group hum. Not a chant, not a prayer. Just a vibration that travels up your legs and into your heart. A resonance that says, "We see you, whatever shape you are." As you walk back down the hill, the chalkboard updates itself magically. It now reads, "Form listener." Why? Because some stories only unfold at night. And you think, maybe that's exactly right. The chalk path curls downward now, winding lazily like a serpent on its lunch break. You pass a field where old scrolls hang from laundry lines, gently flapping in the moonlight breeze. There's something soft in the air, here, like Olympus itself is snuggling under a dream quilt. You don't even realize you're heading toward the edge of the mountain, until the ground slopes gently into a stone landing, fringed with pines and puffs of mist. It's quieter here. No liars, no honks, no flirtatious kadzina mufum. Just the occasional sigh of wind, and the rustle of very bored voices. You found the gossip grove. A crescent moon sign hangs above a sleepy archway. Mythical rumors and nymph conspiracies. Now accepting half-truths and faults. You peek in. At first glance, it looks like a foresty party. Stone benches, mossy cushions, nymphs reclining like exhausted debutantes, and a handful of satyrs too tired to cause mischief, then you realize they're all whispering, not maliciously, just casually, like people, OT. A bus stop who've read the same weird newsletter too many times. Zeus grew those feathers himself. One nymph mutters into her cup of moon milk. I saw him preening in Athena's mirror. Nonsense, replies another, twirling a glowing strand of fine. They're clearly imported swan wigs. High grade. From the underworld boutique. You sit down at the edge of a cushion, careful not to interrupt. What about the lake? A satyr pipes up. You know, the real one. They say it was carved by his tears during the first swan weekend. The group oos softly. But historians still argue whether that's true. Whispers a cloud nymph from above. Some say the lake predates Zeus entirely, formed when Gaia sighed after a particularly dull thunderstorm. You're writing so fast you smudge your own scroll. Here's your mainstream fact drop. Many ancient stories about Olympus were passed not through official decree or temple ritual, but through grove gossip myths, shared under trees, whispered by fires, exaggerated by bored immortals, and enthusiastic shepherds. It's where the myth of Persephone got cinnamon added to the pomegranate story. It's where centaurs picked up their bad boy reputation. But the swan gossip, that's different. Stranger. Sleepier. Did you hear the one where Zeus tried to join the mortal Olympics while in swan form? A satyr asks. Oh yes. Nods. A dryad. He was disqualified during javelin. Something about wing-based cheating. They all sigh. Someone produces a deck of myth-themed playing cards. Each one features a blurry sketch of a god-myth transformation. You spot Zeus's swan, butt stuck mid-shift 7 of honks and nearly dropped your cocoa. A sleepy nymph passes. You, a card. Here. You look like you collect weird truth. You nod, sliding it into your notebook. Suddenly, one nymph leans forward, voice low. But what if he doesn't want to change back? Everyone stills. There's a weight to the question, like it's been floating for ages with nowhere to land. What if he's not pretending to be a swan on weekends? She continues. What if he's pretending to be Zeus the rest of the time? Silence. Then, after a pause, a collective murmur of ... Whoa. You jot it down, stunned. A satyr throws in. I once saw him drifting on that lake, staring at the stars, like he was hoping they'd forget who he was. There's something in your throat now. Not quite emotion, not quite understanding, but close. Someone yawns. Phew. Others follow. This is Olympus. After all gossip doesn't lead to revolution here, it leads to naps. I think the real myth is pretending gods don't get tired. Someone mumbles into a pillow. You lean back and let the voices blend into the night sounds. Above you, the pine trees whisper to their branches creak gently in the wind, and you swear you hear them saying, he was feathers before he was thunder. He glided before he ruled. He dreamt before he judged. You close your notebook. Some truths don't need ink, just ears. As the nymphs begin drifting off mid-sentence and the satyrs start using each other as cushions, you step away quietly, back toward the lake. Toward the myth, you now see more clearly than ever. You retrace your steps slowly, letting your sandals scuff the stardust path just enough to feel the texture of Olympus underfoot. The silence is comfortable now, like the kind you settle into when everyone's said just enough, and there's nothing more to explain. That's when you see it. A strange stone arch rising from the mist, moss-covered and looped with sleepy vines. A little wooden sign dangles from the keystone, carved in looping script. Shrine of the pointless rituals, open on weekends, except when closed. Of course, you step inside. The path leads you into a circular glade with a single stone platform in the center, and scattered around it are various ceremonial items that look like they were invented during an ancient brainstorming session, fueled by wine and absolutely no supervision. A crown, made of stale bread, a swan-shaped gourd, a yawn bell. Yes, a bell designed specifically to ring in sync with yawns. You test it works. You're handed a scroll by a very serious-looking oracle in slippers. Welcome, she whispers. To the ritual nobody remembers the purpose of. You unroll it carefully. The ritual of the weekend, Zeus read aloud, if desired or don't. He's probably asleep. Step 1. Inhale deeply. Exhale all ambitions. Step 2. Honk once for the things you regret. Step 3. Stretch like a bird who's forgotten his power. Step 4. Place one swan feather sandal on the altar. Step 5. Whisper a wish you don't mean out loud. Step 6. Nap under the offering tree for no less than 11.5 minutes. Step 7. Wake confused and slightly lighter. Historians still argue whether this ritual had actual theological importance, you mutter, or whether it was invented by priests, desperate to make nap time sound divine. The oracle overhears and nods gravely. We also have a ritual for forgetting where you put your scrolls. It's just pacing and gentle cursing. You observe as a procession of dream nymphs enacts the ritual with extreme seriousness. One honks with tearful intensity. Another offers up a sandal made entirely of reeds and melancholy. The altar accepts everything, doesn't judge, just glows faintly with a soft swan motif. On the edge of the grove, there is a crumbling statue of Zeus mid-transformation, half-bearded king, half-swan. All confusion. One eye wide with worry, one feathered wing emerging from under a toga like it's not sure it belongs. Someone's written graffiti on the base. The weekend is that truth. A fringed scroll buried in the archives of Phocis once described this shrine in elaborate detail. It was called the ritual of reversal, and it was believed to be the one time each week when Zeus surrendered control not to another god, but to the part of himself that didn't they want to rule, the part that wanted to float. You sit by the offering tree, curious. You watch a dryad stretch her arms like wings. She whispers her wish notable, then dozes off immediately. You try it! You whisper, let me forget the noise for a while. No one claps. The tree doesn't grow, but the grass shifts slightly under your legs, curling just enough to become a cradle. The stars above blink slower. Nearby, a satyr snores through his offering of cheese and half a poem. Someone rings the yarn bell again. It never gets annoying. You ask the oracle if Zeus ever attends. Oh yes, she says, in full swan regalia, places his sandals on the altar, says nothing, honks once, then he just sits, stares at the sky, like he's trying to remember a version of himself that came before the crown. You sit with that the ritual might be pointless, but it's also perfect. Not all sacred acts involve fire and thunder. Some involve bird sounds and very serious naps. And you start to think, maybe divinity isn't about power at all. Maybe it's about letting go of the role you were assigned long enough to remember the one you chose. Feather drifts down from the altar and lands in your lap. You keep it. Not for magic, just for proof. You leave the grove in a daze. Feet lighter, thoughts fogged with a kind of peace you don't usually get from stories of gods and monsters. The path leads you uphill again back, toward the lake, toward Zeus, toward the heart of the myth you've been chasing like a slow dream all night. But something's different now. You see him not just the feathers, not just the silly honks or the dramatic glides. You see the way he sits by the lake's edge, wings folded tight, gazing into his own reflection. The moonlight paints him silver, not divine silver, just quiet, tarnished pewter. A little dull, little tired. You walk to the water's edge and wait. No words, no scrolls, just the soft sound of waves lapping against stardust shore. After a while, Zeus speaks. I never told them why. His voice isn't thunder anymore. It's a breeze wearing a blanket. You don't interrupt. Not now. They all think it's because of Leda, he says. Or boredom. Or whatever the scholars dream up when they run out of amphory to examine. He glances sideways at you, and his eyes are not glowing. They're not regal. They're just old. I did it because I was afraid I didn't remember how to stop. You tilt your head. Being Zeus, he says, the ruler, the thunder, the crown, is exhausting. You do it long enough, and you start thinking that's all you are. He kicks the water, just barely. A ripple fans out like a sigh. But when I'm a swan, he pauses. When I'm feathered and floaty and ridiculous, I forget to be important. I just am. That's the secret, isn't it? The swan wasn't a disguise. It was the escape hatch. The lifeboat. The silent rebellion against being the loudest force in the room. Historians still argue whether the Zeus swan myth was about seduction, you murmur, mostly to yourself, or about power and softness. He chuckles. I like that better. Power in, softness. That's poetic. You can write that down. You do. You take a breath and ask the question everyone else has danced around. Do you ever think about staying? The question hovers like mist. Zeus tilts his beak skyward all the time. Silence. Then he says, but gods don't get to retire. We just transform. Briefly, you watch him for a moment longer. His reflection ripples. The feathers shift, but the stillness stays. He turns. To you, I soft, but I leave hints. I let them wonder. I make them guess. And sometimes they write stories that feel truer than anything I could explain. You think of the egg scrolls, the circus versions, the satire, the broken masks in the gossip grove, the memory feathers from Hera's sewing room. Maybe all of them were right. Or maybe they were all attempts to tell the same story. That even the highest gods have to come down sometimes. To glide, to molt, to breathe. Zeus stretches one wing and fluffs the tips with something like ritual. Do you know the first time I changed? He asks. You shake your head. It wasn't for a mortal. It wasn't to trick or impress. It was just a quiet afternoon. Too much sunlight. Too much sky. I looked at the lake and thought, what if I let go? You sat beside him. Watch the water. The lake barely moves, and you understand now, it wasn't the transformation that made the myth. It was the decision to stop pretending he had to be anything more than floating and breathing and being. You glance across the water and see a line of sandals on the shore left behind by others who came here, tried it, even for just a moment. Artemis's flamingo prints, Apollo's pair-pawed slippers, Hermes' winged flip-flops. They'd all stepped into something else, and maybe, for a while, they'd remembered who they weren't required to be. You write one last note before the pen grows too heavy. Zeus didn't become a swan because he wanted to change. He became a swan because he wanted to stop. And isn't that the most human thing of all? You leave the grove in a daze, feet lighter, thoughts fogged with a kind of peace you don't usually get from stories of gods and monsters. The path leads you uphill again, back toward the lake, toward Zeus, toward the heart of the myth you've been chasing like a slow dream all night. But something's different now. You see him not just the feathers, not just the silly honks or the dramatic glides. You see the way he sits by the lake's edge, wings folded tight, gazing into his own reflection. The moonlight paints him silver, not divine silver, just quiet, tarnished pewter. A little dull, a little tired. You walk to the water's edge and wait. No words, no scrolls, just the soft sound of waves lapping against stardust shore. After a while, Zeus speaks. I never told them why. His voice isn't thunder anymore. It's a breeze wearing a blanket. You don't interrupt. Not now. They all think it's because of Leda, he says. Or boredom. Or whatever the scholars dream up when they run out of amphorae to examine. He glances sideways at you, and his eyes are not glowing. They're not regal. They're just old. I did it because I was afraid I didn't remember how to stop. You tilt your head. Being Zeus, he says, the ruler, the thunder, the crown, it's exhausting. You do it long enough, and you start thinking that's all you are. He kicks the water, just barely. A ripple fans out like a sigh. But when I'm a swan, He pauses. When I'm feathered and floaty and ridiculous, I forget to be important. I just am. That's the secret, isn't it? The swan wasn't a disguise. It was the escape hatch. The lifeboat. The silent rebellion against being the loudest force in the room. Historians still argue whether the Zeus swan myth was about seduction. You murmur, mostly to yourself, or about power and softness. He chuckles. I like that better. Power in softness. That's poetic. You can write that down. You do. You take a breath and ask the question everyone else has danced around. Do you ever think about staying? The question hovers like mist. Zeus tilts his beak skyward all the time. Silence. Then he says, but gods don't get to retire. We just transform. Briefly, you watch him for a moment longer. His reflection ripples. The feathers shift, but the stillness stays. He turns. To you, I soft. But I leave hints. I let them wonder. I make them guess. And sometimes they write stories that feel truer than anything I could explain. You. Think of the egg scrolls. The circus versions. The satire, the broken masks in the gossip grove. The memory feathers from Hera's sewing room. Maybe all of them were right. Or maybe they were all attempts to tell the same story. That even the highest gods have to come down sometimes. To glide, to mold, to breathe. Zeus stretches one wing and fluffs the tips with something like ritual. Do you know the first time I changed? He asks. You shake your head. It wasn't for a mortal. It wasn't to trick or impress. It was just a quiet afternoon. Too much sunlight. Too much sky. I looked at the lake and thought, what if I let go? You sat beside him. Watch the water. The lake barely moves, and you understand now. It wasn't the transformation that made the myth. It was the decision to stop pretending he had to be anything more than floating and breathing and being. You glance across the water and see a line of sandals on the shore left behind by others who came here, tried it, even for just a moment. Artemis's flamingo prints, Apollo's pair-pawed slippers, Hermes' winged flip-flops. They'd all stepped into something else, and maybe, for a while, they'd remembered who they weren't required to be. You write one last note before the pen grows too heavy. Zeus didn't become a swan because he wanted to change. He became a swan because he wanted to stop. And isn't that the most human thing of all? The stars are sinking slowly now, folding into themselves like tired eyes, blinking closed. Zeus still a swan, still silent watch. The waters stretch out like a mirror that forgot how to ripple. The night is nearly spent, and so is the myth. You can feel it, the soft tug of Sunday approaching. Zeus rises, not with flourish, not with drama, just a quiet, practiced movement, a glide that barely disturbs the lake surface. A few droplets left behind to shimmer like tears that change their minds. He steps ashore. The feathers shift. You brace for thunder, but there's only a sigh. The transformation begins not with light, not with wind, but with stillness, like even the magic knows better than to shout. His wings shrink, folding into broad shoulders. His beak fades, replaced by the familiar jawline carved into half the statues in Greece. His feet, once webbed, press firmly into the soft cloud grass. Zeus is himself again, so tough. You notice he doesn't straighten to full height. He stays hunched a little. Less king, more man. He doesn't summon robes or lightning. He's still damp. His hair, now returned, carries the echo of feather down. You wonder if, for a second, he misses the weightlessness. Nearby, the other gods begin to return to their official forms. Apollo stumbles back into his golden self, yawning and clutching his harp like a teddy bear. Artemis stretches out of her flamingo stance and rolls her neck like a dancer after dress rehearsal. Even Hera steps out of the shadows. No embroidery hoop this time. Just a soft folded quilt under one arm. She doesn't speak to Zeus. She just sets the quilt beside him and walks away. You can feel the weekend dissolving. A breeze picks up, smelling like eucalyptus and departure. One by one, the gods begin heading back to their temples, to their shrines, to the myths they've kept in rotation for millennia. Not with grand goodbyes, just gentle nods, tiny waves, an occasional shrug. You and Zeus are the last by the lake. Will you come back next weekend? You ask. He doesn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I always do, even if they forget. Even if they rewrite me. He turns to you, now full guard again, but something softer in his eyes. You'll tell it right, won't you? You. N-O-D. You will. You'll tell it gently, boringly even, because boring is safe. Boring is peaceful. Boring means no thunderbolts or declarations or divine seductions. Boring means a lake. Bird, a moment of breath. You watch him walk away, no clouds parting, no fanfare, just footfalls in the mist, and the faintest rustle of feathers, still not quite gone. You stay at the lake's edge a while longer. You sit cross-legged, notebook in hand, letting the silence settle in your chest. You don't write. You just breathe. You think about all the things you saw this weekend. Pillow battles and gossiping trees, flotations gone feathery, bureaucratic scrolls and illegal naps, passive-aggressive embroidery, and myths that had no point except to slow you down. And you realize that every one of those moments is the real myth. The parts between the thunderbolts, the parts where even the gods needed a break from being gods. You smile. You close your notebook, and the last line, the one that writes itself before you even think it, goes like this. He was never pretending to be a swan. He was pretending not to be one the rest of the week. The wind hushes, the lake settles, and Olympus sleeps. So now, as the last feather drifts down and melts into the soft folds of dream, you're still here breathing gently, half floating yourself, tethered only by the weight of your own comfort. You made it too. The end of the myth, and not by rushing through it, not by seeking drama, or meaning where none was promised. You followed the honks, the naps, the sideways glances, the minor rituals. You sat through silence, listened to the quiet laugh of gossiping nymphs. And maybe you saw yourself in that swan. Not because you're a god in hiding, but because, like Zeus, you've carried too much all week, and you needed this. Boring story. A soft one, the kind where nothing explodes, and nobody wins. And transformation isn't about escape, it's about returning. To softness, to breath, to stillness. So let your thoughts wander like feather trails on the water. Let your limbs grow heavier than myths. Let your eyes blur like parchment left under a warm lamp. There is nothing more to write tonight. No more names to remember. No more metaphors to chase. Just the gentle ripple of a lake that never had to explain itself. And the memory of a swan who forgot he was anything else. Sleep now. You've earned your own quiet form.